The morning of December 26, 1996, in Boulder, Colorado, began like any other post-Christmas dawn, but would soon turn into a nightmare that gripped the nation. The large Tudor-style home of the Ramsey family sat quiet and cold, nestled against the backdrop of the Flatirons. Inside the house, the remnants of holiday celebrations lay scattered about, but a sinister discovery was waiting to be made. Patsy Ramsey, the mother of the house, descended the back staircase early that morning only to find a ransom note left on the kitchen staircase. This 3-page handwritten letter would set off a chain of events that remains one of the most confusing and debated criminal investigations in American history. The setting was the affluent University Hill neighborhood, where the Ramsey family lived a life of apparent privilege and success. JonBenét Ramsey was a wealthy business executive, and Patsy was a former beauty queen who devoted her time to charity work and raising their 2 children. The house itself was a sprawling labyrinth of rooms and corridors that would later become a focal point of intense scrutiny. On this particular morning, the silence of the large home was shattered not by the joy of children playing with new toys, but by a frantic call for help. The contrast between the festive decorations and the impending tragedy created a surreal atmosphere. Patsy Ramsey discovered the ransom note shortly after 5 in the morning and immediately called the police. The note was unusually long for a ransom demand and contained specific threats against the life of her 6-year-old daughter JonBenét. It demanded exactly $118,000 for the safe return of the child. This sum was oddly specific and later identified as the exact amount of the bonus John Ramsey had received that year. The author of the note claimed to represent a small foreign faction and warned the family not to contact the authorities. Despite this warning, the police were summoned immediately. The 911 call made by Patsy Ramsey is a piece of evidence that has been analyzed thousands of times by experts and amateurs alike. Her voice was hysterical and breathless as she pleaded for an officer to be sent to their home. She explained that her daughter was missing and a note had been left. The operator struggled to get information from the frantic mother. At the end of the call, there was a moment where the phone was not hung up immediately. Some audio analysts claimed to hear voices in the background after Patsy thought the call had ended, while others insist the line was simply dead air or static noise. Police officers arrived at the scene within minutes, but the initial handling of the crime scene would later be criticized heavily. The house was not immediately sealed off as a crime scene, which allowed friends and victim advocates to roam freely through the ground floor. This contamination of the scene made the subsequent collection of forensic evidence incredibly difficult. People were cleaning surfaces in the kitchen and moving items around in an attempt to comfort the grieving parents. At this point, everyone operated under the assumption that this was a kidnapping and that the child was no longer in the house. As the morning dragged on, the FBI was notified, and preparations were made to set up a wiretap for the expected call from the kidnappers. The deadline stated in the note came and went without any communication from the alleged abductors. Detective Linda Arndt, who was the only officer present in the house for a period of time, asked John Ramsey and a family friend to search the house for anything unusual. This instruction was unorthodox and led to a discovery that would change the nature of the investigation entirely. John Ramsey headed straight for the basement, which was a cluttered area of the home. In a small windowless room in the basement known as the wine cellar, John Ramsey found the body of his daughter. JonBenét was covered with a white blanket, and her mouth was covered with duct tape. Her wrists were bound over her head with a nylon cord, and a garrote made from a paintbrush handle was tightened around her neck. John immediately carried her body upstairs, which further compromised the crime scene. The realization that this was not a kidnapping, but a homicide sent shockwaves through the house and later the entire community. The brutality of the crime stood in stark contrast to the innocence of the victim. The autopsy revealed gruesome details about the final moments of the life of JonBenét. She had sustained a massive blow to the head, which caused an 8-inch fracture to her skull. In addition to the head trauma, she had been strangled with the garrote. The official cause of death was listed as asphyxia by strangulation, associated with craniocerebral trauma. There were also controversial findings regarding potential sexual assault, but the evidence was inconclusive and remains a point of contention among pathologists. The violence inflicted upon the child suggested a deep rage or a desperate attempt to silence her. The ransom note became the single most analyzed piece of evidence in the case. It was written on a pad of paper found inside the house, and the pen used to write it was also belonging to the Ramsey family. Handwriting experts analyzed the note, comparing it to samples from both parents. While John Ramsey was ruled out as the author, the results for Patsy Ramsey were inconclusive. She could not be ruled out, which fueled speculation that the note was staged to cover up an accidental killing. The language used in the note included phrases from popular action movies, which added another layer of bizarre mystery. Suspicion quickly turned toward the parents, as statistics show that crimes against children are often committed by family members. The behavior of John and Patsy Ramsey was scrutinized by the media and the public. Their decision to hire lawyers and a public relations team shortly after the murder was viewed by many as an admission of guilt. However, the family maintained that they were simply protecting themselves against a police force that had decided they were guilty from day one. The divide between the police and the district attorney office in Boulder grew as they argued over how to proceed. The only other person in the house that night was Burke Ramsey, the 9-year-old brother of JonBenét. Due to his age, he was not initially considered a suspect by the public, but investigators did question him. Rumors swirled about sibling rivalry or an accident gone wrong. Some theorized that a fight over a midnight snack had led to a fatal blow, and the parents had covered it up to save their remaining child. However, Burke has always maintained his innocence, and no physical evidence has ever definitively linked him to the crime. He was interviewed by child psychologists, who found his demeanor consistent with a grieving sibling. The investigation was plagued by errors and missed opportunities from the very beginning. The failure to separate the witnesses allowed John and Patsy to potentially coordinate their stories, although there is no proof they did. The failure to search the house thoroughly upon arrival meant the body lay in the basement for hours while officers stood in the living room. These mistakes allowed defense attorneys to argue that any evidence found later could have been planted or compromised. The Boulder Police Department was not accustomed to handling homicide cases of this magnitude, and the lack of experience showed. An alternative theory that gained traction was the intruder theory. Supporters of the Ramsey family pointed to a broken window in the basement as a point of entry. A suitcase was found beneath the window, which could have been used as a step. Additionally, an unidentified footprint from a boot was found in the mold on the basement floor. This footprint did not match any footwear owned by the family. Proponents of this theory argued that a predator had been watching the family and had broken in to kidnap the child, but the plan had gone wrong. Lou Smith, a legendary homicide detective, was brought in to assist the investigation, and he became a staunch believer in the intruder theory. He pointed to 2 small abrasion marks on the back of JonBenét, which he believed were caused by a stun gun. He argued that the killer used the stun gun to incapacitate the child before taking her to the basement. Smith meticulously documented evidence that the police had overlooked, including the presence of unknown DNA on the clothing of the victim. His work provided a strong counter-narrative to the police theory that the parents were responsible. The most compelling evidence for the intruder theory was the DNA found mixed with the blood in the underwear of JonBenét. It was the genetic profile of an unknown male. This DNA did not match John Ramsey or Burke Ramsey or any other person known to be in the house. For years, this evidence was dismissed by some as contamination or insignificant, but as DNA technology advanced, it became impossible to ignore. It suggested that a stranger had indeed been in contact with the victim during the assault. This tiny biological clue remains the best hope for solving the case. The media frenzy surrounding the case was unlike anything seen before. Tabloids and mainstream news outlets alike were obsessed with the image of JonBenét as a beauty queen. Videos of her performing in pageants, wearing makeup, and elaborate costumes were played on loop on television. This imagery polarized the public and led to harsh judgments about the parenting style of John and Patsy. The case became a symbol of the loss of innocence and the dark side of American ambition. The relentless coverage often prioritized sensationalism over facts, making it difficult for the public to discern the truth. In 1998, a grand jury was convened to hear evidence and decide whether to indict the parents. For over a year, the jurors heard testimony from detectives, experts, and witnesses. The proceedings were secret, and the outcome was not known for many years. It was later revealed that the grand jury had actually voted to indict both John and Patsy Ramsey on charges of child abuse, resulting in death, and being an accessory to a crime. They believed there was probable cause to bring the parents to trial based on the evidence presented to them. However, the district attorney Alex Hunter refused to sign the indictment. He believed that the evidence was not strong enough to secure a conviction in a court of law beyond a reasonable doubt. He knew that the compromised crime scene and the conflicting forensic evidence would make a trial a risky endeavor. This decision was controversial and angered many within the police department, who felt that the parents should face a jury. The case effectively stalled, leaving a cloud of suspicion over the family, without any legal resolution. Years passed with little progress until 2006, when a man named John Mark Carr was arrested in Thailand. Carr was a teacher who had become obsessed with the case and had exchanged emails with a documentary filmmaker, claiming he was present when JonBenét died. He confessed to the killing, claiming it was an accident. For a brief moment, it seemed the case was solved. The arrest was headline news around the world, and Carr was flown back to the United States. However, cracks in his story began to appear almost immediately. The confession of John Mark Carr turned out to be false. His DNA did not match the sample found on the body of JonBenét. Furthermore, evidence surfaced that placed him in a different state at the time of the murder. Prosecutors realized he was a delusional individual seeking notoriety rather than the actual killer. The charges were dropped, and the public was left disappointed and cynical. The false confession only served to highlight the desperate need for answers and the vulnerability of the case to hoaxes and false leads. In 2000, 8 new DNA testing techniques known as touch DNA were applied to the clothing of JonBenét. The results confirmed that the DNA found on the waistband of her leggings matched the DNA found in her underwear. This reinforced the theory that an unknown male handled the clothing. Based on this new evidence, District Attorney Mary Lacey issued a formal letter exonerating the Ramsey family. She apologized for the years of suspicion and stated that the evidence pointed to an outsider. This was a major victory for the family, but did not convince everyone. Burke Ramsey remained out of the public eye for decades, but in 2016, he agreed to an interview with Dr. Phil. The interview was intended to clear his name, but it drew mixed reactions. Viewers analyzed his body language and his tendency to smile while discussing gruesome details. Experts explained this as a nervous coping mechanism, common in people who have experienced trauma, but social media lit up with renewed suspicion. The interview reignited the debate about his potential involvement, despite the official clearance from the authorities. Around the same time, a television network aired a documentary series that convened a panel of experts to re-examine the case. The panel concluded that Burke Ramsey was likely responsible for the death and that the parents had covered it up. This led to a massive defamation lawsuit filed by Burke Ramsey against the network. The lawsuit was eventually settled out of court for an undisclosed amount. This legal battle demonstrated that the family was still willing to fight aggressively to protect their reputation and challenged the media narrative. The house in Boulder where the tragedy occurred has changed hands several times over the years. It underwent extensive renovations to change its appearance and remove the stigma associated with the crime. The address was even changed to discourage tourists and curiosity seekers. Despite these efforts, the house remains a grim landmark in the city. It stands as a silent witness to the events of that night, holding secrets that the walls can never tell. For the community of Boulder, it is a constant reminder of the unresolved justice. Patsy Ramsey did not live to see the continued developments in the case or the eventual exoneration letter from the district attorney. She was diagnosed with ovarian cancer and fought a long battle with the disease. She died in 2006 at the age of 49. She went to her grave maintaining her innocence and the innocence of her husband. Her death added a tragic layer to the story as she died without knowing who killed her daughter and without clearing the family name in the court of public opinion. JonBenét Ramsey eventually remarried and tried to rebuild his life, but he never stopped pushing for the case to be solved. He has been a vocal critic of the Boulder Police Department and has frequently called for the investigation to be handed over to an independent agency, or the FBI. He believes that new genealogy techniques which have solved other cold cases could identify the owner of the unknown DNA. His persistence demonstrates a father desire for justice despite the immense personal toll the case has taken on him. In recent years, the Boulder Police Department has stated they are reviewing the case with fresh eyes. They have consulted with cold case experts and private laboratories. The rise of genetic genealogy has given hope that the killer could be identified through a distant relative in a DNA database. This method was used to catch the Golden State Killer, and many believe it holds the key to the Ramsey case. However, the sample size is small and degradation of the evidence over time poses a significant technical challenge. The mystery of who killed JonBenét Ramsey persists because it contains a perfect storm of conflicting elements. You have a wealthy family, a bizarre ransom, note a compromised crime scene, and forensic evidence that points in two different directions. The intruder theory is supported by DNA, while the family theory is supported by the circumstantial evidence of the note and the staging. This duality keeps the public divided. People tend to interpret the facts through the lens of their chosen theory, dismissing anything that contradicts it. The debate often boils down to RDI versus IDI, which stands for Ramsey did it versus intruder did it. Internet forums and podcasts are dedicated to dissecting every minute detail. Amateur sleuths spend hours enhancing photos of the basement window or analyzing the handwriting of the note. This citizen detective culture keeps the case alive, but also spreads misinformation. The sheer volume of noise surrounding the case makes it difficult for the actual investigators to separate credible tips from wild speculation. The legacy of the JonBenét Ramsey case has had a lasting impact on how child protection and media ethics are viewed. It sparked conversations about the exploitation of children in beauty pageants and the privacy rights of victims. It also changed how police departments handle high-profile cases involving wealthy suspects. The errors made in the early hours of the investigation are now taught in criminal justice classes as examples of what not to do. The case serves as a cautionary tale about the importance of securing a crime scene immediately. The videos of JonBenét in her pageant attire remain the most enduring images of the victim. They present a stylized version of the child that often overshadows the reality of her short life. Critics argue that these images dehumanized her, turning her into a caricature rather than a real little girl. The focus on her appearance distracted from the brutality of her death. Remembering her as a child who loved to play and ride her bike is important to reclaiming her humanity from the sensationalist narrative. One specific piece of evidence that continues to baffle experts is the presence of pineapple in the stomach of the victim. The autopsy showed she had eaten pineapple shortly before she died. A bowl of pineapple with a spoon was found on the breakfast table with the fingerprints of Burke and Patsy on the bowl. The parents denied feeding her pineapple that night. This detail suggests that JonBenét was awake and eating after the family arrived home, contradicting the story that she was asleep the whole time. It is a small detail with huge implications. The spiderweb found in the corner of the broken basement window is another detail that is fiercely debated. Intruder theorists argue the window was the entry point, but skeptics point out that a spiderweb in the corner was undisturbed. They argue that it would have been broken if an adult male had squeezed through that small opening. This seemingly trivial observation becomes a pivot point for the entire intruder theory, demonstrating how the case hinges on the interpretation of microscopic details. Today, the case remains open and active, although it is classified as a cold case. New leadership within the Boulder police has promised to utilize every available technology to find answers. The passage of time is a double-edged sword. It degrades physical evidence and memories fade, but it also allows for new scientific breakthroughs and relationships to change. Someone who remained silent 20 years ago might be willing to speak now. The hope for a resolution has not been extinguished. As we look back on the tragedy that unfolded on that cold December morning, we are left with more questions than answers. The JonBenét Ramsey case is a haunting reminder of the fragility of life and the elusive nature of justice. Whether the truth lies within the family circle or with a shadowy intruder, the failure to solve this crime is a collective tragedy. Until the final piece of the puzzle is found, the ghost of the little girl in the pageant dress will continue to haunt the American conscience.